dialectically interdependent, through which human beings elaborate norms and values, moral codes and institutions, which impose themselves on others and on themselves with a concreteness, hardness, and indifference to the will and fate of the individual, analogous to the material reality. So, to sum up, social construction is thus a very broad process within which the construction of norms, laws, and in turn labor markets are included. There is no doubt, therefore, that social construction of the labor market is a result of social, cultural, territorial patterns featured by a finely woven network of differently actors playing different roles and animating different spheres. For example, the state system, the private system, the collective autonomy system, and society as a whole. The social construction of labor market is a dynamic process to which correspond different outcomes that are closely linked to the society in which they occur, and for the reason they are not universalistic. The labor construction process is the living and evolving result of different interaction and features and subjects which give rise to different jobs and a plurality of markets. In this regard, this conference intends to place itself with the framework of this consideration with respect to the plenary session, which I'm not focusing on since Silvia already talked about today's one. It is worth mentioning that while looking at the key thematic and disciplinary insight, the following one will characterize this conference. Okay. So, the first one is the role of industrial relations and collective bargaining for the social construction of new labor markets. Built on the rejection of the orthodox proposition of perfectly competitive labor markets and the inevitable existence of labor problems, industrial relations have developed from the outset of the 20th century onwards, both as a field of study and a practice. Then they were just subject to various challenges between the 1980s and the early 2000s. In response to these pressures and changes, researchers in the industrial relations have focused their attention on the effects of new organizational practices on firm performance and workers' welfare, as well as new forms of voice, new groups of workers, and union revitalization effort. Yet, despite a few attempts, no radical change has definitely spread in the way industrial relations are conceptualized to pave the way for a profound update of labor markets governance. Today, though, the twin digital and environmental transition is further shaking the traditional industrial relations structures and processes by urging researchers and scholars to think beyond the bounds of current institutions and advance fundamental change in industrial relations theory. The effort should be intended not to dismiss industrial relations, but after acknowledging the persistence of their raison d'etre, they grant them a new effective role in the construction of a modern and sustainable labor market. Having such in mind a challenging invitation, we sought and gathered in this conference empirical and theoretical contribution focused not only on how industrial relations institutions are adapting to tackle critical issues, but also on the emergence and development of new forms of labor representation and social regulation within new or very peculiar fields, in the belief that they could represent relevant test branches not merely for an adaptation and modernization, but also for an audacious renovation of industrial relations theory and practice. One further central element in the theory concerning the social construction of labor market is the one on skills formation. Analyses that investigate how worker skills are built, for example, through which channels, which tools, and which forms of collaboration, integration, and governance between training institutions, companies, and social partners, are a particular interesting angle from which to approach the theme of this international conference. Also, in the light of our rapidly growing phenomena such as skills mismatches, the declining attractiveness of certain traditional professions, the importance of promoting quality employment and combating youth unemployment and inactivity, the implementation of innovation and specifically of technologies and organization methodologies linked to the twin transition, but also the impacts that the main demographic trends indicate with a progressively aging population. Particularly interesting in this sense is the study, an in-depth study of competence training systems through an interdisciplinary methodological approach that is able to properly highlight also in the framework of the theories on how institution evolves, how different forms of institutional collaboration between the main stakeholders, as mentioned before, correspond to different ways of building competencies more or less effective in responding to the new needs generated by the transformation of work. Therefore, and going to the conclusion, we need to consider the implication of this phenomena with respect to the regulation of labor markets and in general labor law. We have wondered about the legal and institutional framework in order to understand whether it is adequate to the challenges of a just transition, to counter the risk to which workers are exposed as part of their path within transitional labor markets. In this regard, multiple aspects of labor regulation shall be considered. First, the rules of organization and regulation of labor markets with the definition of the function of its intermediaries, for example, labor market enablers. Understood in a broad sense with reference to professional intermediaries, agencies, and social partners, and of their relationship with the administration and territories. It is adequate legal institution infrastructure of the labor market the basis for different forms of reasoning, the management of active labor policies, also in terms of conditionality, and the connection between these and income protection, the tools for building school-to-work transition, but also those for ensuring lifelong learning, the system of certification of skills, as well as the definition of the rules for accessing profession. The inclusion of disadvantaged workers should also be examined, as their position could be further aggravated by the pressures mentioned before arising from the twin transition. These are issues that concern the protection of the worker in the market, but also in the employment relationship, and are a precondition for efficient labor markets, where the management of transition between sectors, job position, or different employment statuses is not left to the ability of the individual, but should be governed with the most appropriate regulatory tools according to national and territorial areas. To conclude, 3 days, 100 speakers, more than 20 countries, different disciplinary approaches, different professional backgrounds and theoretical references. This is our effort as a school to bring our contribution to the reflection on the social construction of labor markets during this conference and to build the future of work together.
Margherita. So thank you, thank you, Margherita, for outlining the concept and reasoning on which we have based the idea and the theme and the topic of the conference. So in the social construction of a new labor market, employment agencies and intermediaries, or at large HR services industries, play indeed an important role in different ways. To this respect, Victoria focuses on specific aspects, namely how HR services industry contributes to bridging the gap, the mismatch between workers and employee expectations. So okay. So just a moment, and please, Victoria.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to the esteemed audience. It's a pleasure for me to It's a pleasure for me to talk in front of such an esteemed audience today. So thank you, and also Margarita for laying out such a great foundation for the whole conference ahead. While I will be speaking about something much more, let's say, practical, I think the ideas you have conveyed in your presentation echo strongly in the presentation I'm going to make now. So let's just dive in without further ado. Yes. Yes, thank you. Just one word on who is or what is World Employment Confederation. We are a global organization. I'll jump one slide ahead just to show you that our members span on every continent. They're mostly 50, so there are 50 national federations and 7 largest groups who operate globally, we are the voice of labor market enablers, and we also cooperate with international organizations such as ILO, OECD, World Bank, European institutions, and we promote the value added of the HR services industry to better functioning labor markets, and we aim to be the reliable source of data and insights which we gather from our members and the ground, ground zero operations that we represent. We aim to be a leader in the changing world of work, a thought leader, an expert. We aim to educate the stakeholders that we work with and set the quality standards for the industry. So what has been happening? I mean, as also mentioned by Margarita, many things are really seriously disrupting the world of work over the last years. People are quitting, they are reevaluating their priorities, companies are struggling with retention of talent, and if people don't leave organizations, they are still quietly quitting, so to speak, this new concept of working, doing just the minimum and then earning, the age at the end of the wage at the end of the month. Many things are happening and disturbing the usual, or let's say, the way of working as we were used to. And here are a few numbers to underpin what I've just said. On the US side, we see a huge resignations that have been registered in the last couple of years. Really unseen number of resignations historically from 2011. And the incredible number of over 40 million people leaving labor force, and labor participation rate has dropped dramatically in the first wave of the pandemic, and it has not recovered since, as we see on the right-hand chart. This is related to the pandemic, but also to other social factors such as aging and so on. We'll see that further. But the fact remains, the distraction has been very, very significant. There is an interesting UK study on the reasons for leaving the labor force. And we see that aside from retirement, and I mean, some people retired earlier, given the circumstances, it was probably more interesting to retire earlier. We see that health concerns are really a dominant reason for leaving the labor force. We see that in the US, also on the graph on the right-hand side, you will see that the expectation of retirees is going to only increase in the future in the US. So it's also a story of retirement of baby boomers and economic situation and so on. So a lot of people leave the labor force, and of those who quit, 65% globally are not returning to the industry they left. So it's not only about retirement, it's also about reflection on the meaning of work, and what does it make me feel? How do I connect with what I do? And only 35% actually continue working in the same industry. And I think this is very telling. Another little chart I want to show you. I don't want to kind of bombard you with numbers, but I thought it was interesting. Another study by McKinsey this time, where they show that of people who did not quit, a whopping average of 40% of workers globally are considering leaving in the next 3 to 6 months. So we see less and less interest in, long-term work, more movement and more mobility and changing not only work from let's say if it's a bank or from one bank to another, or from one industry to another. Maybe it's also in taking other forms of work, not necessarily employee. So what are the reasons behind? And there is a whole little universe of different reasons why people leave and change their current employment status. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you probably connect with one or more of these reasons. And this is what we at the World Employment Confederation call the great mismatch. It's the growing mismatch of expectations on the part of the employers and on the part of the employees. And so let's have a look in more detail on the great mismatch. I mean, look at this. 69% of employers globally are having difficulties hiring. And if you see, this starts from Q1 2012, and we see that these numbers are really unprecedented. There are more and more job openings, and therefore people who are actively looking for employment are having more and more choices to find a new job. But those places are difficult to fill, and the employers are struggling. On the other hand, let's look at this chart. It's a busy one, but just to pinpoint the idea behind the fact that the perception of whether management meets the expectations is very different from top management to mid-management to non-management. So basically, not to say that managers live in ivory towers, but it's a little bit of that the lower down the hierarchy you go, the more you realize that actually the perception of what's going on in the company is very, very different. And it's particularly touching on the points like organizing resources of budget, staff, and technology, on providing regular guidance and checks, checking your mental well-being. Really, you can see that the difference is very, very high. Encouraging time and resources for training and upskilling and reskilling. Again, clearly non-managers are much more interested in these points than managers are. A different way to look at it, zooming in on the question of flexibility, work flexibility, we see here from this study that employees, they wish and expect much more work flexibility than what is actually offered today by managers. So all of this shows you how deep and vast is the growing mismatch between what is available and what is desired by the workforce. Let's put it this way. And so here, just to show you this kind of summarizing point of the gap in expectations from the executives and the employees. Executives are more concerned about the ability for remote employees to build solid interpersonal relationships, while employees think, well, I can perfectly do my work at home, and I'm definitely as eligible to all the benefits as those who work at the office, and so on. While executives are concerned with the potential deterioration of the organizational culture because everyone works remotely, employees are actually often very happy working from home. So there is a very different way to look at the same phenomenon of just working from home. And I thought this was super interesting. If you look on the left-hand side, the pre-pandemic priorities for employees, the top priority was securing a comfortable salary. And another one that I thought was very, very interesting, finding a sense of purpose in my work. And then after pandemic, so April this year, what we see is the top two are quality of life and health and well-being. So clearly, something that was almost at the very bottom of priorities for employees just 2 years ago, today is becoming super important. So in this, in the aftermath of a very stressful event that happened, that shook industries, economic sectors, that shook up the social construction, forces people to concentrate more on the basic needs that the human has, which is a quality of life and the well-being, health and mental well-being. So I think this is very interesting. It's very simple and very interesting chart. Again, another way to look at it is the job stability, fair compensation, work-life balance are the top values today, compared with advancement opportunities, which are now at the very bottom. The proximity of the place of work compared to where a person lives, and which was probably much more important before, today plays much less a role. So, bottom line, the huge mismatch between workers wanting freedom, well-being, and development, and employers wishing for resilience of their enterprise, being able to manage through the difficult waters when external factors are shaking up the construction of their organization, and still being able to be profitable at the end of the day. Completely different orients, completely different northern stars that make it more difficult today than ever to find a match between the labor demand and the labor supply. So what do HR services do to help bridge this gap? Let me just put it this way. Staffing and recruitment agencies are the first go-to place for people to go and seek for a job opportunity. And I mean, there is a reason to that. Let me show you. The HR services industry has developed a full range of talent management solutions. And all of this is in response to demand, because the unique position that private employment agencies take is that they know exactly what is needed in terms of skills and abilities, because companies contact the employment agencies asking for a specific set of skills. And then they have also the people who come and say, I want to do this, but I miss that. And here comes in the expertise of the HR services, where they say, okay, we're going to take you and train you or reskill you and help you find the job where you're going to thrive and make your mission a success. And as we know today, because people don't want to work 9 to 5 anymore, they don't want necessarily to go every day to the office. They probably want to do some freelancing, or they want to just work from home. And then they use online platforms for finding a job, or even staying at home and doing, as an independent, just doing small tasks for a multitude of different clients. All of this is possible with the help of HR services industry. This is a very busy slide. All I want to say is that the three key motto words for our industry is responsibility, flexibility, and opportunity. We feel responsible for helping to match the skills with the demand. We are flexible and in looking for ways to do this, and we always offer an opportunity for anyone who wants to learn and to get a job to succeed. And just a small statistic that annually, every year, HR services industry upskills or reskills over 20 million agency workers. So that's like I think, Belgium and Czech Republic combined. So this is not a small task, and the private employment agencies have seen also, as a result of the war that broke out in Europe this year, an influx of immigrants who are also of very particular kind. It's mostly women with children who are looking for a job to be able to sustain their very uncertain situation. And even there and then, the HR services sector has helped them to do the maximum possible to place these people in the temporary jobs where they can keep on living and keep on earning the money and not fall down into poverty. So, my final word, I hope I'm not over time. If you're interested in what I've been talking about and maybe much more, next year on the 29th of March, we're holding fully on-site conference in Brussels. We have a lot of speakers and a very packed day, so you're very welcome. I think registration opened yesterday, so you're very welcome to check out the program and register if you want. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, Victoria, for your presentation, also for underlining these aspects with reference to skill and our agency, the role of the agency also to this respect. And actually, Margherita told us that a central element of the social construction of labor markets and new labor markets is the skill formation. How workers' skills are built, or better have to be built, and the role of education and training in the social construction of market and skill. So now Glenda Quintini addresses the question of skills, more precisely the alignment of learning and labor market skill needs. So we see if the connect, okay. So please, Glenda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am going to find my presentation and share it. And thank you very much. I'm sorry that I'm not in Bergamo with you, which also happens to be very close to home for me. I hope the presentation is visible in a slide show. I don't see it yet, but
not yet in slideshow.
Let me try again. Yeah, it should be fine now. Okay, so thank you very much. Very interesting points made by Victoria and very good points also made by Margherita. So I'll try and shed further light on some of the issues that were already mentioned. And I'm going to talk about emerging skill needs and also the policy challenges and how to address them. So I lead a team where we look at skill needs in the labor market, and then we look at the policies to address the changes in those skill needs. And when we look at how the labor market is requiring new skills, we normally think about 4 megatrends as key drivers. So we look at the twin transition, the digital and the green transitions, which are increasing the need for new skill sets or changing the way we carry out our jobs, and so changing the tasks within occupations. We also look at non-standard work, also as a result of the future of work. Many workers now have non-standard employment relationships, like through the gig economy, the platform economy. So there, in fact, also new skill needs emerge. And then there are trends that are a little bit less talked about now, but they're still inexorably ticking, like population aging, which affects both the skill supply and skill demand. and globalization, which affects skill needs through the distribution of tasks along value chains. Now, the result of all this is changes, as I said, on the demand for skills side. This chart shows you the skills that are mentioned in at least 10% of online ads in 2012, and then you see, these are the highest, the most frequently mentioned skills, and in 2012 and then 2019. And you can see that this includes quite a few transversal skills like time management, like customer and personal service, coordination, self-management and rigor, which are all mentioned more frequently now than they were in 2012, and also some digital skills like communication and media or office tools and collaboration. They are also more technical and job-specific digital skills like computer programming. So, what can we judge whether adults do possess the skills that are required in this reality where higher level skills are in demand, where digital skills are in demand? So, this is a little picture of skills across different domains in OECD countries on average, and you can see the three domains of literacy, numeracy, and problem solving, which we measure at the OECD through the survey of adult skills. And you can see that both in literacy and numeracy, there's a very large share of adults that have skills at level 1 and below. So level 1 and below is a very low level. It means you can only interpret very simple information, either in wording or numerical information, and you have 20% of adults on average that have this very poor level of literacy, even more if you're looking at numeracy. And then there is problem solving, which is actually digital problem solving, because it's problem solving using a computer, a digital platform. And what you can see is, again, there's a large share that scores below level 1, which is the lowest level for this particular domain. But you also have a relatively large share that actually was not even able to take the test because they didn't have the necessary digital skills, because they decided they didn't feel sufficiently comfortable with a computer to take the test on a computer. So actually, overall, it's a very significant share with very basic digital skills. As a result of this, we do observe shortages, more structural shortages on the labor market. At the OECD, we measure them through our OECD Skills for Jobs database, which uses signals of skill shortages at the occupational level. So signals like wages, like hours worked, for example, and employment, unemployment, and other qualifications. So basically, the assumption is that, for example, for wages, employers will raise wages for a given occupation if they are facing shortages, or, for example, workers already in that occupation will have to work longer hours if new staff cannot be found. Once we have the shortages expressed in terms of occupations, what we do, we attach information on skill requirements, which comes from live task data, so job vacancy data, and includes the skills and abilities required in each occupation. And so we can translate our measure of shortages by occupation into shortages by skill. So what is the picture that comes up? Well, if we look at the industry level, we can see that the shortages are particularly high, for example, in the education sector, in the health sector, among professionals, ICT sector, and while surpluses are more focused in generally lower skill sectors like food and accommodation, manufacturing, transport, and so on. On the occupational side, so if we look at jobs rather than sectors, you see that there is a certain correspondence. So again, you have shortages among health professionals, among teaching professionals, among ICT and personal services, but also for a number of lower skilled occupations. So this is in line with what we're seeing today. I think we have to distinguish in any case between what are structural shortages, so shortages that are due to more structural phenomena, and those that we are hearing about and observing today, which are often related to relatively poor working conditions, or again to the disconnect between the expectations of workers and what employers have to offer, that Victoria has just told us about. If you look at shortages today, they are based on again a structural analysis. They are predominantly in high-skilled occupations. So you see that on average in the OECD, about half of the shortages are in high-skilled occupations. In some countries, it's much higher, reaching up to 90% in Belgium and 80%, over 80% in Finland. In Italy, for example, it's slightly lower than OECD average, slightly less than 50%. When we express the imbalances in terms of, when we express the imbalances in terms of skills, you can see that the shortages are observed again in skills that are needed in health occupations or teaching occupations. There are shortages also in reasoning and problem solving, for example, in learning skills as well. And there are also shortages observed in programming and digital content creation, so some digital skills. On the other hand, the surpluses tend to be in more physical skills, fine motor skills, transport-related skills, for example, and some transversal skills. The same database also tells us about mismatches on the job. So we can see that there is a significant share across countries of workers with a higher qualification than the one that's required in their job, and a relatively large share also of workers with a lower qualification than required in their jobs. And the green line will show you, on the other hand, horizontal mismatch, so the difference between the share of workers who are working in a field completely different from where they have graduated. So these mismatches have a cost for individuals, particularly individual mismatch like qualification mismatch or field of study mismatch will bring about lower wages, lower job satisfaction, potentially the risk of job loss or skills obsolescence for the skills that are not used in a given job. For employers, it means lower productivity, it means they're not able to find staff that they need to introduce new technologies, to innovate, increase productivity. So there's delays in these innovation practices, potentially a higher turnover because mismatch workers tend to quit. And then you have that this sums up at the aggregate level as less competitiveness, lower aggregate productivity, and also potentially a sunk cost in the skills system because some adults will have, some young people will have qualified in fields or at a level of education that is not required or they're not using on the labor market. So the alignment of what is the training available to skill needs is a major issue. So we know that when we look at the training that's available for workers, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily focus on the workers that need the training the most or the training that is required to make the economy more responsive to changes. For example, here you see the difference in the participation in training between workers in jobs at high risk of automation and workers in jobs at low risk of automation. And you see that, in fact, those in jobs at high risk of automation receive less training, not more, than those in relatively secure jobs. Even when we look at companies providing training, employers, we see that there is a certain disconnect between what employers express as their strategic objective and what is the true content of the training they provide. So this is a chart that compares the three top priorities expressed by firms and the three top trainings by contents of training. And you can see the full alignment is achieved very, very rarely, that in most cases there is either no alignment or a very poor alignment between the two. We also know that a lot of the training that's provided is actually not the type of training we are talking about when we talk about changing skill needs. So this is very important. So there's training for health and safety. There's a lot of induction training that goes on, but it is very important, but it's not the type of training we are I'm discussing today, so to align with changing skill needs. And so when we see figures about participation, we should discount this. And also, we also know that many firms, even those bigger than 10 employees, I mean, some countries, they are not necessarily the bone of the economy. In fact, they very few. There are quite a few that do not assess their skill needs. So how can we improve this alignment? And I think I go back to an idea that Margherita was putting forward about collaboration among various stakeholders. So here I'm talking in particular about stakeholders in the skills domain rather than the whole labor market, but they are very broad. In fact, what happens when we are talking about skills, and particularly lifelong learning and skills for adults, is that there are many ministries involved. So already you have Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Education, then potentially many other ministries. Then you have all the training providers, the formal education system, you have employers, you have representatives of workers. So it's important that there is an alignment between the education and training that's provided and what is required on the labor market. So the first element is certainly trying to have a better collaboration between education and training providers and employers, so bringing students to the labor market through internships, apprenticeships, placements of every sort, visiting workplaces, also bringing the labor market to students by inviting speakers, organizing seminars and fairs, or other courses preparing young people for the transversal skills that will be required to find work and progress in the labor market. But very important, there are some education institutions, particularly tertiary education institutions or universities, that are experimenting with a much closer collaboration with employers. So, for example, there are some universities that are looking at setting up steering committees with employers in the industries that employ their students typically. So, for example, there's an example that I like to give from Finland, where there is a University of Applied Science that has set up the steering committee to identify the transversal skills that young people will need in the labor market, and then it mainstreamed them through all the coursework. Recognizing industry credentials is also rising in importance, also a way of recognizing learning in other domains outside university or formal education, for example, recognizing Microsoft or Google Garage qualifications. And then there's also many universities starting to broaden the range of teachers they employ so that some have industry experience. Another important aspect is involving employers, and I can broaden this to the social partners more generally in skills assessment and anticipation exercises. So these are all the exercises that allow us to tell what's coming, what are the skill needs that are coming up as a result of the various transitions. And employers tend to play a big role, first because they can inform the format and the granularity of the data. So we're sure that once the data is produced, it's useful to them, because they know how jobs are evolving, and because they can also help identify skill gaps, training gaps to respond to these skill developments. And finally, I'd like to just go through a few innovative solutions that have been that are being developed by many countries in the OECD, again, to make the adult learning system more flexible, to ensure that we are supporting adults in developing the skills needed in the labor market. So first, many adults know a lot of things already, even if they don't have qualifications to prove it. So being able to recognize that knowledge and identify skill gaps is very important. So the recognition of prior learning, so recognition of any knowledge outside education is very important. It allows identifying skill gaps. And then another important element is having modular training that are available, short modules that fit with those skill gaps rather than reinventing the wheel and teaching things that people already know, but also that are better for adults who normally cite the lack of time as the key reason why they're not participating in training. Those modules need to be certified, so there's also innovations in the certification. For example, we're hearing a lot about micro-credentials or certificates for short courses that can be then stacked and portable across institutions to give rise to a qualification. In many countries, there's also attempts to empower adults to train. So this means that we are giving adults a right or an amount of money to participate in training of their choice. Of course, the challenge here is whether everybody is going to be able to choose a training meaningfully, and so many of these systems actually also provide career guidance and advice, which I would say is a bit of the all-encompassing policy. We do it very badly for young people. We still do it quite badly for adults, but it's very important to motivate adults to train, to encourage their participation in training, and particularly to steer their training choices and their employment choices towards jobs that are in need in the labor market and that provide good prospects for growth and career progression. This is my last slide. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Glenda, for your presentation. The point you made, the data figures, and also these innovative solution you presented. Together with skill formation, obviously, as mentioned by Margherita, for the social construction of labor market, very important is the role of industrial relation, collective bargaining. And so in this regard, somehow, Voucher is going to focus on platform work, so specific actually theme, with also some mention to representation and somehow industrial relation. So just a moment. So please.
Yes. Can people hear me? Perfect. Let me know when that stops being the case. Don't know what I'll do then, but I'll try to intervene. So, are my slides visible?
Just a second.
Okay. Well, I can give my introduction already. So, I am Wouter Zwijs. I'm with the European Trade Union Institute, which is a research center supporting the trade union movement in Europe. Importantly, not to be confused with the Trade Union Confederation itself, so I don't speak on their behalf. In case people are confused to that. What I'm going to talk about today is somewhat disconnected a bit. It's very much connected to the topic of the conference, but it's somewhat disconnected to the previous two discussions. I will really focus on research we've done at the ETUI, focusing on platform work and trying to explain how many people do platform work, how important it is within the European labor market, and what we can say about who does it in their conditions. And as mentioned, I will briefly discuss some issues as well related to the organizing of these workers and what we can say with our data. So this will be a relatively boring data-driven presentation, but I'm very happy to discuss afterwards and make it more exciting where possible. So the reason we're interested in this is because clearly platform work is getting a lot of attention. It's a very important topic. National member states, the European Union are all thinking about how to regulate it. But there is a bit of a blind side in that we don't actually know all that much about just how widespread it is, how intensively it's being done. And the reason for that is that data is relatively sparse. There's been some really cool studies on specific platforms, on very in-depth studies on workers on platforms. But to actually know the prevalence is a bit more difficult. Where there have been surveys, they're sometimes very widely varying in what they find about who does it. A reason for that is that, one, it's relatively difficult to survey, and two, very often convenience samples are being used. Now, that's a bit technical, but it just means that you're asking people you can reach, and that's not always as easily representative of the population. So what we try to do in this survey is try to get a first answer on how many people are actually involved in internet and platform work, and then what can we say about these people. Something went wrong. It's that I can't distinguish up from down. So the Internet and Platform Work Survey, there was a first wave carried out by my colleagues Jan Hokepil and Agnieszka Piasna, who are also involved in this project very much. But because there can only be one speaker, it's me in this case. So they did the study for 5 Central and Eastern European countries in 2018-2019. But I will speak now mainly about the second and third waves, which were done in the spring and autumn of 2021. Ipsos, on our behalf, interviewed 1,750 people in 14 European countries. We tried to get as good a geographical spread within the European Union as possible, given our budget, which is why there's a big, wide gap in the Scandinavian countries, which we could not afford, given that they're relatively small as well in population. Apart from that, I think we have a relatively good geographical spread, covering large percentages of if you would take the whole population of Europe. Then we carried out a repeat survey in the autumn of 2021 for 8 countries, Italy, Spain, France, Germany, Czechia, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Estonia, with slightly smaller samples. Here I'll talk a little bit about how we measure Internet and platform work, which is important because it's one of those things that we had a lot of debate on, because we all recognize a platform when we see it, but it's relatively difficult to ask it in a survey. So what we did is we specified 9 activities that we see as important and that we wanted to know about, in which people can earn money on the internet. And if people said they did any of those activities ever, we asked them several follow-up questions. Did you do it in the last year? How often? And also, what website or app did you use? And then for those tasks, we could just directly code the apps or websites used. And we classified a specific website as a platform if it had the following 3 components. It matches clients to providers algorithmically. So it's not just an advert service. The money is handled in some way, and there is a rating service. So those are the 3 aspects we looked on. In the activities we asked, we went for a wide variety. I'm going to focus on 5 here. So we asked people, did you ever do click work, which are these small tasks like filling in a survey, classifying pictures. Think of what Amazon MTurk offers, for instance. That's click work. Remote professional work, more traditional freelance work, specific projects like IT, translation, copy editing. On location work, which is work done in someone's house or on private location. Very often this was tutoring, babysitting, handiwork, that sort of work. Transport work, which is the more emblematic type, think Uber, think Lyft. And delivery, which we can all imagine something with as well. We also asked wider questions, which I'm not going to discuss here, but are interesting as well, asking people whether they made money by social media, through renting out property they own, or selling products they make themselves, or reselling as a web shop, not second-hand products. So based on this, we can classify people who have some experience making money through the internet. Then we look at people doing internet work. That's the click work, remote professional, on location, transport or delivery. And a subset of those we classify as platform workers. People who did these tasks in the last year through a platform. Based on that, we get the following distribution. About close to a third of people ever made money through the internet through any of these tasks. But then if you go to the actual internet work, we're about 12%. Half of those we can call platform workers. This is a quite conservative estimate. And then we extrapolated this to the whole of the European Union, given that the numbers were relatively similar over the countries. And then a small group of about 1.6% of the people aged 18 to 65, we call main platform workers. These are people who earned at least half of their annual income through platforms or work 20 hours per week. So these are the people that intensively work through these platforms. Now, this is a relatively small number, 1.6%, and even the 5.6%. Even though, of course, once you put it in millions, it's not that tiny. It's still 16 million people. We still think it's very important to look at this and to focus on it for 3 main reasons. One is that there's a large growth potential. About half of these people that we found being platform workers started in the last year. So there is some growth over time. Second, these internet workers, which we classified as not platform in the end, very many of these apps or websites through which they work have some platform-like tendencies. So we see this as a sort of potential of growth of internet and platform work. And third, it's also very clear that platform work can be seen as a sort of extreme version of algorithmic management of certain aspects of organizing of work that are being used, that are also being used more and more in the traditional offline labor market, which makes it all the more important to study this case in detail. So I'm going to skip slides from time to time because I had too many slides and I want to give myself some flexibility in time. So no panic, it is all part of the plan. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what sort of work this involves. And here it's just to try and contrast the sort of ideas we had going into the study with what we find. When you talk about platform work, very often the focus is on Uber specifically, or that sort of work at least. The most common type of platform work, however, is this type of remote click work, which people do very small tasks for very little money, and this is also growing most. After that, you have the remote professional delivery work. Those are also relatively popular, but they're all substantially behind. And now I want to talk a little bit about who does platform work. I'm showing here the probability of doing main platform work. So remember, well, you don't have to remember, I have a line. It's at 1.6% overall. And there is this idea of platform workers as we don't have to regulate too much because it's often students, it's young people, it's sort of extra income. There's a little bit of truth to that, but only a little. We find platform work actually over all age groups, over all types of employment status, but there are, of course, some groups more likely. So indeed, people under 35, which is already doubtful whether that's really young, but that's a definition that I feel comfortable with and that I use. So people under 35 are much more likely to be main platform workers, but it's not like there's no people over 35, so they make up a sizable proportion too. Women are somewhat more less likely to be platform workers, but here the interesting thing is it differs a lot depending on the type of work. So for click work, it's about 50-50. For this on-location work in people's homes, this is very female-dominated. In our study, this was a lot of tutoring, babysitting, so it really just reflects gender divisions in society in general. And then the most skewed was driving people around. That's almost exclusively male, as it is in the general industry and presumably for health and safety reasons as well. So then we also have by qualification, generally the main platform workers are somewhat more highly qualified, and they're more likely to be migrants and born in other countries. So we're doing a separate project on this as well. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. Then we also looked at the relation with people's offline work. So we asked people, what is your main employment status? Which of course is a very important topic in all the debate about platform work. Firstly, we generally find that if you just look at the percentage of people who are employed among platform workers, non-platform workers, it's about the same. It's close to 70% being employed, but the type of employment differs. Many more self-employed and on precarious types of employment for the platform workers. And what we also find is that it's not the case that people who are not working, like inactive and unemployed, are much more likely to go into platform work. So the unemployed are a bit more likely, the inactive are far less likely. We have retired here, but the study goes until 65, so it's already not that many retired people we have, and they're very unlikely to do platform work. Students, as expected, they're quite likely to do platform work, but again, and this is the crucial thing, not exclusively. Compared to some other studies that looked at this, for instance, the Colim study, for instance, other surveys, what we find is a far less distinguished, far less of a break between platform workers and non-platform workers. So yes, they have a slightly different profile, but it's not a big, sharp difference. It's not like these are exclusively young students. And that is quite important in the rhetoric and the discussion as well. So as the takeaway, who does this platform work? There are differences by social demographics and by employment status, but it's not a completely different workforce. Now I'm going to very briefly talk about the conditions of work. Now, our study is really good at saying who does platform work, what are the probabilities. Of course, once we look only at the platform workers, it's starting to become relatively small numbers. So I'm not going to focus too much on this. I'm just going to show this particular table showing for platform workers of different types, how many hours do they work per week at the median, what are their earnings at the median, and then in those countries, which is almost all of them, with a statutory minimum wage, if we just very basically divide the earnings by the number of hours, how many earn more than less than the minimum wage? Key point here is that the median platform worker in our sample works about 7 hours per week on the platforms. It's less if they do micro tasks, it's more if they do the remote professional work. They earn quite little. So between 80 and 170 for different platform workers. Main platform workers earn 400 euros. The crucial thing is that most of them actually earn less than the minimum wage if you take into account their hours. Now, what are some of the reasons for this? Probably because we ask how many hours they think they work. And those are not necessarily the hours that they get paid for, which is one very crucial part with platform work. It involves a lot of unpaid hours and unpaid time, which I see a team that does a lot of work there on the front, on more or less the front of this auditorium, so they can say much more. But that's something that comes back in all the studies. A lot of the time spent on platform work is not paid, even though it's time spent working, which is part of this dividing the flexibility and pushing it on the employee or the worker rather than the platform. So now I have a little bit of time, but definitely not much, and I'm going to talk about two extensions to this. One is we were interested in to what extent there's differences in regions and to what extent the regional labor market, the local labor market, affects your probability of doing internet and platform work. The rationale here is that if there are fewer opportunities for you to work in your own region, you might be more inclined to work on platforms, especially the remote work, because you can access a global or more or less global labor market. And so we wanted to use the fact we have this survey and look at regional variation. That is, the result is this map here behind me. So I'm showing in the regions of our survey, what's the share of people doing offline work, that means they're employed but they do no internet work, and then what's the divisions between internet platform and main platform work. Now, I don't want to go into these regions at all. The main point here is that there is some variation, more if you actually formalize it than in the offline labor market, between regions within a country. And now we wanted to see to what extent can we explain some of this variation. Is it the case that where you have fewer opportunities in your own region, you're more likely to go into internet or platform work? And for that, we looked at the unemployment rate within a region, the quality, but also the quality of jobs. So the rate of people who are underemployed, their wages, and the share of manufacturing jobs. So here I'm showing if there's a big shift within a region in terms of unemployment rate. That's the top left there. Well, my left eye. That one. A big shift in the unemployment rate, for instance, is associated with fewer people working offline and more people doing either no work or internet and platform work. The main takeaway here is that indeed in those regions with fewer good opportunities offline, so just fewer jobs or fewer good jobs, you get a sort of exchange where more people supplement their traditional work with internet or platform work. It's not a replacement from not working or unemployment. It's really an addition. So people who already work tend to take on a bit more internet and platform work, which to us kind of indicates it's something, they're not great jobs, but people take them as a supplement when need be. And there is this variation in the local labor markets, which we call here work as a last resort then. And essentially we think there should be more regulation. The final extension I'm going to talk about is this promised part of the organization. That is work we're currently doing also as part of an ACTRAF paper and that we're working on at the moment, is to try and look with the survey and with the data we have, what can we say about attitudes towards trade unions and ways of organizing, which is quite important because there is a huge literature on how do you organize these workers, especially also with employment status. Are they freelance or self-employed, in which case you run or ran before the rules changed into collusion things, or are you talking about workers, precarious workers who need to be organized? And there's a whole literature on this, which my colleague Kurt, for those who are more interested in, can look at. For those who are interested in, my colleague Kurt does a lot of work on this, and we're developing more work. Our main point here is that even though there are new aspects to platform work, in terms of it allows for a disparate workforce, it's not always so easy to organize them, and there's these new algorithmic aspects. When you interview and when you look in depth, very many of the same constraints and the same concerns come back with workers. Concerns about, do you get paid for all your work? Do you know how much you will be paid next week? Health and safety, and having a stable income, and having some sort of transparency in the management process. So these are aspects that, of course, traditional employees also face to some extent. And our argument here is that there's not really such a style break with other types of precarious or problematic work. And actually, what we wanted to look at is there how are the attitudes towards trade unions among these workers? Because we know from other studies, for instance, with the SMART project in Belgium, there was a project where it was clear that actually workers were willing to be organized and have more labor protection. And what we find is that people are indeed relatively positive towards trade unions and actually relatively likely to have joined them already or be willing to join them. But of course, this only comes when you compare them to other people of similar characteristics. Because as I said, they tend to be younger, have less experience on the labor market, be more highly educated, and these are not the traditional trade union profiles. So you do need to compare like with like. And the main aspect here is we also see this on the ground. There's many more collaborations and many more agreements between platform workers and traditional unions, on top of grassroots organizing and different types of organizing. And that, I think, is where I'm going to stop, saying that, in conclusion, internet and platform work is still a small part of the economy, but growing, large potential of growth. I see now that large potential could be interpreted differently. I mean here of growth. Conditions are generally not great, which is for some of the platforms a bit of a euphemism. Also, if you look at, for instance, what the Fair Work Project finds, not great is really sometimes terrible. And there is definitely scope for representation, new forms and old forms, and improving these people's rights. I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, Wouter, for the evidence of your study and your survey. Now we decided that we have no more time, since we have also to there is another venue for the conference. So I thank you a lot, our speakers, and maybe you can take the opportunity during the coffee break if there are some questions. I'm sorry. So thank you very much. We have 15 minutes for a quick coffee break, and at 3:45 workshop are starting. And I remember two speakers and also participants of workshop 4 and 5 should go to the second conference venue, Spazio Viterbi. Is 5 minutes by foot, and we can provide you some information if needed, I think. So thank you very much, speakers and participants, and just a little break.
What you want to do for
but you don't give up. In my world, only you make me do for love what I would not do. My friends wonder what is wrong with me. Well, I'm in the days from your love, you see. I came back to let you know. Got a thing for you, and I can't let go. I only want the best is true. I can't believe it. Just a quick information, the coffee station is over there in this room. Do for love